Excuse me everybody, we're about to start in a minute. If you'd like to take your seats please, thank you.
If you could just make an announcement as well to remind people that the channel are around during the whole of the intervals to film and talk to anybody who's had experiences.
I've just got to tell everybody the Sci-Fi channel are around. They're over here on the left. They do want to talk to anybody who's got any experiences they'd like to share with them, or anything at all to do with UFOs or anything else like that. Just have a word with them. Right, so if I can introduce the second speaker of the afternoon, Philip Mantle. Philip is a well-known director of Bufora, the nationwide network of enthusiasts dedicated to exploring the UFO mystery. Fresh from his international lecture tour, he will discuss alien autopsy and other related themes. Included in his lecture will be footage from Argentina, which will receive its UK premiere this afternoon. Now, can you all welcome on the stage Philip Mantle.
Thank you very much. I think it's fair to say that the topic of which I'm about to discuss is the most controversial aspect ever of UFO research, and I don't say that lightly. I'm going to attempt to briefly outline for those that are unaware or don't know how things came to be, how certain things were released, and discuss some of the implications. We'll also show 4 pieces of film. The first will be the so-called tent footage owned by Santilli. We'll also show the autopsy in full in its original format. Again, I think most of you will have seen it, but for those that haven't. And then we'll look at 2 attempts to reproduce the film. One is from Germany and one is from Argentina that just arrived last week. As far as the Argentinian film is concerned, I have to apologise for its poor quality. It's probably a 7th or 8th generation copy before it reached me, but I thought I would nonetheless take the opportunity to see it here today. Everyone knows of the conventional story of Roswell, first released in the Roswell Daily Record way back in 1947, and in early to mid 1993 I received a telephone call out of the blue from a gentleman called Ray Santilli, claiming to actually have film of the event in question. I did not know this man, never heard of him, knew very little of him. He claimed that he'd been recently in the United States researching a music video, and by chance he happened across a former military cameraman who sold him the film, eventually sold him the film. For some 18 months I heard very little more from Ray Santilli. Promises to see the film never actually materialized, and it wasn't until early 1995 that a copy of Roswell the movie landed on my desk for review purposes, made by the Showtime company in the United States. And it sort of jogged my memory somewhat about this chap called Santilli in London who claimed to have this film. I had told a number of my colleagues about the story. Some of them are here today, some of them were overseas. And I thought, well, I'll give him one last telephone call perhaps. I phoned Ray Santilli and I said, Ray, this is Ray pictured on the top of the screen here, do you still claim to have this film? This is Ray. And he says, yes, Philip, but you don't believe me. And I had sent many faxes saying exactly that. And I said, well, I can't really believe you until you actually show me the film. So in early 1995, I cannot recollect the exact date, I did not keep a diary of events. I travelled to London, I made an appointment with Ray, along with my wife Sue, to view the film, and it was at that meeting we viewed for the first time the so-called tent footage in Ray Santilli's office in Balcombe Street in northwest London. I asked him a number of questions for obvious reasons, but I also asked if we could have samples of the film for analysis. He said maybe. I asked if we could speak with the cameraman. He said definitely not, under no circumstances. And at that time I was involved in organising Bufora's conference for later in the year. In fact, it was almost completely finished as far as organising was concerned. So I took a long shot and asked Santilli if he would show the film at the conference, and to my surprise he said yes. I knew from past experience that it would automatically gain media attention and media exposure, and I hoped that by doing that somebody somewhere would be able to get to the bottom of the film. So that's how my involvement with Ray Santilli came about. The picture on the bottom is the people who made Incident at Roswell. This is the producer here, John Purdy. Some sad people about, but never mind. We will carry on regardless. I would ask you not to interrupt, madam, whoever you are. You can ask questions at the end like everyone else. The first stills from the film weren't actually released in the United Kingdom. They were actually released in a small country in the boundaries of northern Italy. It's called the Republic of San Marino. A very small country. It's basically just one mountain, has a population of 20,000. And it's famous probably for nothing other than it's the oldest republic in the world. And at a conference there in 1995, the first stills were released. They were screened privately behind closed doors to the organising committee, members of the San Marino government, and invited people from various parts of Italy, including another UFO group. And these were some of the stills in question. I didn't actually show them. They were shown by a gentleman called Chris Carey, who was the director of Ray Santilli's company. I was actually at the conference to speak about something completely different. So the first stills were actually released outside of the UK, and they caused great debate, both on the day in question where they were shown, and since that very day around the world. This is just a tourist shot of the Republic of San Marino. A great deal of controversy was caused later when the first chance that many ufologists, members of the media, and invited guests at a screening of the film on May the 5th at the London Museum took place, organised by Santilli and his company. There were a number of ufologists there from different parts of the world, including Italy and the United States. And one of the things that caused a great deal of controversy right from day one was the telephone in the film. Not so much the telephone, but the curly cord. One of the gentlemen who was there on the day and is probably one of the most vociferous opponents of the film is American researcher Kent Jeffrey. I'd managed to I asked Santilli if Kent Jeffrey could come along, and he said fine. He didn't know him from Adam. And after he saw the autopsy film, Kent was quite sure, quite positive that such telephones with a curly cord did not exist in 1947. But I'm afraid, to his disappointment, they certainly did. It's a rather poor picture of them. They weren't necessarily standard issue, but such things did exist. And we also examined the other artifacts in the film, such as the clock, the microphone, and the medical instruments. And they were all, again, circa 1947, and previous to that, of course. So even the instruments themselves fit in. Bufora made an offer to Ray Santilli around about April of 1995 through our colleague and chairman, John Spencer. John, by profession, is an accountant and business trainer, and many of his clients work in the special effects industry in the UK, but he also was extremely friendly with the former managing director of Kodak in Hemel Hempstead. And through his contacts, we had Kodak agree to analyse a piece of the film if they could gain access to it. They even agreed to send a private courier to collect the film, keep it in a vault in Hemel Hempstead, etc., etc. Unfortunately, that never happened, but Bufora put all of this into writing to Ray Santilli and his colleagues at a very early stage. We interviewed Ray. This is a cartoon that was done about one of my interviews. It's supposed to be me and Ray and the creature on the slab. And he basically told his story that's been published around the world. This is an extract of it from, I think it's Encounters magazine. It was also published in the 14 Times. So he told his story yet again and again and again of how he acquired the film. Ray claimed at that point to have had the Kodak analyse a piece of the film. In fact, that wasn't strictly true. He'd shown Kodak a piece of film with no images on it that had an edge code of a black triangle and a black square. Kodak said that this could be filmed from 1927, 1947 or 1967. They recirculated such codes every 20 years and discontinued that particular code in 1967. But they saw no film with actual image at all. This is the actual letter from Kodak, and it says 1927, 47 or 67. Ray claimed that that was definite proof that indeed they had analysed the film, but I'm afraid not. Ray also commissioned, if you like, if that's the correct word, a pathology report by Professor Christopher Milroy, a pathologist at the University of Sheffield. And in many of his television interviews, Professor Milroy, and I quote, says, although a close-up of the brain was shown, it was again out of focus. However, the appearance was not that of a human brain. But his conclusion was that we were looking at some kind of deformed human creature, and that he fully expected to see this in the medical literature somewhere. And to the best of my recollection, that has not yet happened. This is the cameraman story was also released by Ray Santilli. I can't read it out verbatim because we simply don't have the time. I'm trying to get through all of this in just over an hour. But it has been readily available, and he claimed he was in the military, was flown into the area in question, and filmed the events as detailed on the Santilli film. And that's just another part of it. He mentioned a number of military figures in his statement, all of which were factual and actual and correct. Doesn't prove anything, of course, but they were all around at that time. The first magazine anywhere in the world to publish anything, any stills from the film, was actually in France. It wasn't in the United States, it wasn't in the UK, it was this particular magazine in France. But since that time, it has been published in virtually every country that I know of that has a magazine of this kind. This is Germany. This was the Times, I believe, and that's my photo of Santilli himself. Paid me £50 for that, made me a rich man. But as you can see, they were not convinced of the film Little Green Man or a Jolly Green Giant hoax. United States, the MUFON Journal. So Ray Santilli did show the film at Bufora's conference last year in Sheffield. He also showed for the first time there in public the so-called debris film. This was the proceedings of which, again, our interview with Ray was published. And I think opinion, to say the least, was divided upon the first real public screening of the film. Before the so-called debris film was made public, Ray released a drawing from the film, and this is the drawing in question. There are those that believe that the so-called symbols on the wreckage here spell video TV or video OTV. But I sent this drawing to the British Museum. I didn't have any stills from the film, just one of them, to see if they could decipher what it may or may not say. And in a letter dated the 5th of July 1995, the British Museum informed me that also, and I quote, although some of the inscriptions appear to contain Greek letters, these may in fact be symbols, since the inscription as a whole makes no sense. I'm afraid we have been unable to identify these symbols. Can prove very little, but I'm pretty sure if they could have spotted video TV if it was there. And just another close-up of some of the markings that's available on the debris film. I apologise for the pictures being out of focus. I've taken these from my computer, and I'm completely computer illiterate. I don't know half of what it can do. I have no idea what these things are supposed to do on the edge, for example. Perhaps someone can tell me. I'm at a loss. And that's just another still from the so-called debris film. And the letter from the British Museum, just in case people do not believe that it actually exists. There's a copy of it. Back to San Marino. After the Bufora conference, the government of San Marino, who organised and sponsored these conferences, organised a special conference on Roswell and also the Santilli film. It was causing obvious interest and debate. And these are just some of the speakers that were there that day. You may recognise some of them. It's Dr. Bruce Maccabee, Michael Hessman, Don Schmidt, that's Jesse Marcel Jr., Stanton Friedman, and this gentleman is Javier Sierra from Spain. There were others there as well, but these were the English-speaking contingent, if you like. Sorry, it's upside down, but Ray also released what he claims was copies of the film canister labels with the writing on. Some of you may have heard Doris Sims this morning talking about handwriting analysis. Ray gave us a fictitious name, a pseudonym for the cameraman called Jack Barnett. And a gentleman, I don't know if he's here, supplied me with an official document of Jack Barnett. There was such a person, on which there was some handwriting. And through Daryl Sims and Doris, I provided them with a copy of this document and also copies of these to see if the handwriting matched, just in case. They didn't. There wasn't enough, I believe, handwriting to come to a definite conclusion, but the conclusion they reached that it did appear that they were written by two completely different people. There is indeed a big problem with the canister labels. Not so much what's written on them, but the seal, this official seal. It represents one of the intelligence services in the United States. And although the handwriting is dated of July, this seal, as far as we can ascertain, did not come into use until at least September or October of 1947. It is an anomaly. We don't know if these are real, when they were actually stamped, but it is certainly an anomaly as far as these labels or alleged labels are concerned. This is the lineup in San Marino once again. There were others there who I couldn't manage to get on the original. There was also Linda Moulton Howe and many Italian researchers also. One of the researchers who has got very little to do with ufology is this imposing looking gentleman, and he's Professor Pierluigi Balloni. I beg your pardon, excuse me. Professor Balloni is probably Italy's most prominent pathologist, and he has made some very interesting comments about the film, although he is extremely critical and extremely skeptical about UFOs and the extraterrestrial hypotheses. And I will read some quotes from him in a moment. He spoke at length about the film in San Marino. Here he is on the podium, and also at the same time that particular year appeared on a number of television programs in Italy discussing the film. One of the film's most vociferous supporters is Michael Hessman from Germany. Michael also spoke on the same bill, if you like, at the conference last year in Sheffield that showed the Santilli film for the first time. Michael is the editor of magazine 2000 in Germany. He's a historian and a cultural anthropologist by profession. And Michael has been very active in trying to get to the bottom of this film, and has done quite a bit of travelling to try and get to the bottom of it. This is just Michael at last year's Sheffield conference. Michael had a three-way conversation, allegedly, with the cameraman. He was on the phone to Ray, and Ray was on another phone to the cameraman, requesting specific details where this event took place. If it did indeed take place, where did it crash, where were the bodies recovered. And after several hours of to and fro-ing of conversation, Michael received specific locations near Socorro, New Mexico, as to where this event supposedly took place. One of the landmarks that's not visible on the photographs was a wooden bridge. And Michael and his colleagues actually missed the landmark because the wooden bridge had now fallen into disrepair. But he is convinced that whoever gave him this knowledge via Ray Santilli, if nothing else, had an extremely good working knowledge of this particular area, and he's not convinced that Ray Santilli does. For example, Ray Santilli calls Socorro Scirocco, which I think is an old Volkswagen car. Again, Ray Santilli for over a year called Roswell. Doesn't prove that this is where any crash took place. It does suggest that whoever Ray was supposedly talking to at least knows the area. But Michael's convinced that certainly this general area is where the incident supposedly took place. There is a great deal of debate about that. I'm not sure I share Michael's conclusions about that. In between time, myself, the Fortean Times and John Purdy at Union Pictures received this letter from a company claiming to be Morgana Productions. They sent 3 black and white photographs with it, which clearly shows a model, a dummy, being in various parts of production. You can see it's been painted, and here the eye coverings are being placed on it. There was no message with this at all. I passed these on to John Spencer and asked if he could look into this. This is an airbrush, and John knows a number of people in the special effects industry, and apparently this airbrush is a rather unusual one. It's not a common one, and cutting a long story short, he managed to find out that there was indeed a company in the country that had done this. They weren't called Morgana, and they were concerned, as far as they were saying, that gullible ufologists had fallen for Santilli's tricks, and they just wanted to highlight that, you know, a model could be made, and they were quite embarrassed that John had managed to find them so easily, but find them he did. But some people thought that the Morgana pictures was proof positive that the film was indeed a hoax. They released a statement, unfortunately I've got it the wrong way around here, that basically highlights what I've had to say. They were concerned that we'd all been fooled. I think they even sent the photographs to a number of newspapers, but forgot to give copyright permission to use them, therefore they were never printed. At the end of last year, in Dusseldorf was another conference which detailed the Santilli film in some detail. This is the lineup of people who spoke about it. There's Michael Hessman on the end, George Wingfield, Colin Andrews, myself, Reg Presley, and Bob Shell. Bob Shell's from the United States. Let's go back one. Bob is the editor of Shutterbug magazine, which is the 3rd largest selling photographic magazine in the world. He's acknowledged as an authority on film law, film copyright law, and has tried to get to the bottom of the film. He made a number of comments originally about the film, has retracted some of them, but outside of his field of expertise, he's tried to investigate the film along with a number of others. Prior to being a film expert, he was actually a qualified zoologist and at some point also worked for the CIA. And one of the things that Bob tried to do was to seek out medical opinion on the film to see what the surgeons, the pathologists, physicians would say about it. And recently, Bob has given his current status, his current thoughts, his current comments on the film, which I'll quote. Bob Shell, my assessment. At the time of writing, which was August the 27th, 1996, it is very difficult to make any authoritative statement about the Alien Autopsy film. I have to confess that my gut feeling is that the film is very real, and have been frustrated in my inability to produce anything concrete either to confirm or disprove this hypothesis. Speaking strictly from my zoological background, and reinforced by the medical opinions I have received, this does appear to be a real body of a non-humanoid being dissected in the film. So that's Bob Shell's current statement on where he is with researching the film. At the same conference in Dusseldorf, these 2 gentlemen came forward. Myself and Michael Hessman were in the conference auditorium. Well, they managed to get hold of Michael, and they claimed too that they had autopsy film. They told a story through an interpreter. They couldn't speak English, or they claimed they couldn't, that this gentleman's girlfriend had been left some possessions by her deceased uncle. And among these possessions were a number of video films and on one of the video films was an apparent autopsy. The build-up to Michael's conference had seen pictures and stills and so on, and they wanted to know if we were interested in the film. We took a statement from them. This is the interpreter. He was a German but could speak very good English. We asked them to come back the next day if they had the original film, because we fully expected that that would be the end of it. On viewing the film, we immediately cried hoax, and I will show you it later. It all later transpired that they were from Spiegel TV and had basically tried to set Michael up. There they are. There again. You'll notice in a lot of the instances they always have a bag. He's got one under his arm. Again, the background there, under his arm, they were there carrying bags. Here again, has the bag here. In the bag was a hidden camera and a microphone also, for which they were trying to record us. They called my wife Sue. They didn't know her name, but they called her the American lady, for example. That's how accurate they were. She comes from the West Country. This is Bob Shell. Bob has also tried to locate any other possible witnesses to the event. According to the cameraman, if he is to believe, the events in question took place on May the 31st, 1947. And indeed, Bob and Michael Hessman did find a number of witnesses to an event on that particular evening. They were Native American Indians living there at the time. They were children, but they used to play out at night because it was cooler to do so. On May the 31st, 1947, they reported a fireball or a meteorite or something of that nature come to Earth. One of the little girls, now grown up of course, remembers the incident so clearly because she was playing with a coin that she put into her mouth, and because of this event she swallowed it. And another of the little girls remembers the date because it was her birthday. They have been interviewed. I think one of them certainly now lives in California, but the others are still in the general area. There's also Indian legend of six-fingered beings. The creature on the Santilli film has 6 fingers and 6 toes, of course. These are from the glyphs in some of the canyons of the United States where the Indians used to live. And they tell stories, legends of creatures with 6 fingers and 6 toes. Probably has no relevance, but it's just an interesting little side issue that there is certainly a legend, a folkloric connection, if nothing else. So what is the Santilli film? What is it? There are those that believe, yes, it is an alien. Certainly Michael Hessman is convinced that we are looking at a non-human being. There are those like Kent Jeffrey, I mentioned Kent earlier on, that is convinced that it could be a doctored human corpse. There are others that think it's, a special effects hoax. I think virtually every special effects person, that's the politically correct way to say that, I believe, expert, is convinced that they could recreate it. There are those that think it is a genetic defected human being. There are those that think that the American government is behind this, that this is a fake film put out by the powers that be in the United States to distract the researchers away from the real Roswell event. And in that respect, it's a huge red herring. And at some point, they will come forward and say, it is a hoax, and will pour scorn on the whole issue. Well, as I pointed out, I think to a man, I think I only know of one special effects person who believes it is a hoax. They are divided on how much this would cost to recreate in special effects terms. I've heard as little as £20,000 and as much as tens of thousands of pounds. So I think it's clear from that special effects, as far as cost is concerned, differs widely. If it is a fake, and I don't know if it is or not, I'll gladly present Ray Santilli with something like this myself. I haven't got this particular item, but I have something quite similar. Have aliens landed? I don't know. I'll highlight that when we watch the film. And it wouldn't surprise me if something like this wasn't more involved, that we'll probably never get to the bottom of it. Before I came to the conference this weekend, I tried to speak to Ray Santilli on the phone, and I did, and I pressed him once again for an answer as to why we cannot have sufficient film to analyse. He gave me a small piece that didn't have the image of the creature on, which we had checked, analysed, I should say, at the University of Pisa in Rome by Dr. Corrado Malanga, and all he did was a chemical test and told me what the chemical compounds this thing was made of. We asked Kodak to comment, and they refused. They're not prepared to comment on anyone else's tests. But Ray has made it quite clear at the moment, for at least, he will not release sufficient film for analysis. Make of it what you will. But there are a great many people, I'm sure a great many people in this audience still believe it is a hoax. Believing and proving it's a different matter. A lot of people have put forward their opinion that it's a hoax. An analogy that was given to me just this last week was that the Princess Diana video, where she was allegedly romping with her lover in some front living room that was filmed, was exposed as a hoax within a day of its publication. I think the Hitler diaries of some years prior to that lasted a week, but I know some of the Loch Ness stuff lasted a long time before they were published as a hoax. So far, 18 months down the line since the film was made public, no one has proved it's a hoax. Doesn't mean it's not, of course, but nobody has yet proved it to be a hoax, or indeed the genuine article. If we could turn the slide projector off, we'll look at some of the films. I don't know if any of you have seen the tent footage before. Some of you may have done. We'll start with the tent footage. And it was the first piece of film that Ray Santilli showed to me. It was in his office in early, probably February, March time, 1985. What Ray Santilli claims about this film is that one of the reels he received, he calls the junk reel. It had all bits and pieces of film on it, and this was part of it. And he claims that the cameraman's memory is somewhat vague as to what it may or may not relate to. It was released to the broadcasters, most of which never used this. It was never shown on television, for example. Prior to Channel 4's documentary incident at Roswell, I was invited by Union Pictures, the maker of the programme, to their offices in London, at which there were a number of senior executives of Channel 4. They showed the autopsy film that everyone's now seen, and then Ray Santilli, who was there with Chris Carey, showed this film as well, but a much clearer copy. No one took any notice of it apart from myself, and on that copy you could clearly make out the faces of these individuals. What generation copy this is, I don't know. The only television company in the world to broadcast this piece of film was in Japan, and this took place on February the 2nd, 1996. It was the Fuji TV network. They aired its own program on the Santilli autopsy film. And in their programme they showed for the first time the so-called tent footage. And commenting on the tent footage was a former forensic pathologist of the Tokyo Forensic Institute. I'll try and pronounce his name, I'll probably get it totally wrong. Dr. Masashiro Ueno. Something like that anyway. And Dr. Ueno states, "We see two persons wearing white overalls. Something is lying on a bed covered with a sheet," referring to this film. "I think the intestines are being extracted. I think it is the intestines, small intestines." And that's a quote from Dr. Ueno. And that was the first and only TV, as far as I'm aware, that have actually aired this film. And that was in February of this year. This is the material that he's referring to. You can make out a knife of some kind in his hand. There's a gentleman here in dark clothing who walks backwards and forwards. See the knife there? I think it's probably a more controversial piece of film even than the autopsy. That's my own personal opinion. Attempts to computer analyse the film in Italy have come up with some interesting speculation, but they were working with an even worse copy than I have. So I think it's premature, if nothing else. There's a light source there, there's one on here. Okay, can we end it there, please? Just repeat a little bit towards the end. And can we have the next video, please? But that's the first piece of film that Ray Santilli showed me in his office. I think he'd also shown, at that time, Reg Presley, possibly Colin Andrews as well. And it's called the tent footage. It's supposedly some kind of examination of the creature in a field tent or some kind of temporary structure. But the tent footage name has stuck with it nonetheless. I'm more interested in that than perhaps the autopsy film. If we run the autopsy film next, please.
So far, there isn't a shred of evidence to suggest that this film that you're about to see is a hoax. I think it's the most significant piece of film on the subject matter. I hope you enjoy it.
For those that are unaware, there is actually two autopsy films in the possession of Santilli and his company. This is the one that's been released in public. To the best of my knowledge, there's only a handful of people who have actually seen the other film. Myself, my wife Sue, Reg Presley, Colin Andrews, Maurizio Baiata from Italy. There may be one or two others, but I'm not sure. The creature is pretty much the same as the thing you see on the slab here, although it is undamaged, doesn't have the leg and arm injuries that you see. The procedures are similar, but they are different. They carry out some kind of gynecological examination, for want of a better phrase. And in my opinion, the film that has been unreleased is far superior. For example, the camera doesn't go as close, therefore it doesn't go out of focus as often as this one does. During this film, they take a piece of something from the chest cavity, which you only see for a few seconds, and it's out of focus. but in the other autopsy film you see it for a much longer time and much clearer. What it is, I don't know. I've only ever seen that film once, and again that was in Santilli's office, and that's my best recollections of it. What we have attempted to do, I've already stated that virtually every special effects expert is convinced that they could recreate this, and I'm pretty sure they could. But we've also tried to show it to the medical community, not just in the UK. I mentioned Professor Milroy, but in many different parts of the world also. A colleague of ours called Luc Bergin in Switzerland managed to have the film screened at a convention of pathologists in Switzerland, in Basel, in Switzerland, and I think there were some 150 pathologists present. A Professor Mihash at the University of Basel in Switzerland, pathologist, he's quoted, "As for the organs removed, they could not be tallied with any human organs." As part of the Kiviat Green production for Fox TV in the United States, Professor Cyril Wecht, ex-president of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, is quoted as saying, "I can't place these structures in an abdominal context. I find it difficult to bring in connection with the human body as I know it. The structure that must be the brain, if it were a human being, does not look like a brain. It does not seem to be a human being." My colleague Odd Gunnar Road in Norway showed the film to Dr. Karsten Nygren in Oslo, Norway, again a pathologist. "This is not a human brain. It is much too dark." I mentioned at the conference in San Marino, the rather imposing looking gentleman, he is Professor Pierluigi Baimer Bologna of the University of Turin in Italy. Very vociferous opponent of UFOs and extraterrestrials, but he made some rather interesting comments about the Santilli film, and I quote, "When we look at the inner organs of the body, we find no single organ that in any way resembles any human organ. The main organ, which could be the liver, has neither the shape nor the location of a human liver. The face of the alleged extraterrestrial shows surprising anatomical features, very big ocular orbits, a very flat nasal pyramid, a mouth somehow wide open. Nevertheless, the face is flat. There is no evidence of facial musculature as it is present in human beings, which is responsible for the large variety of facial expressions of the human species. My overall impression is that we are dealing with a creature that seems to belong to our species, but it's so clearly different from us that it seems absurd to speculate about the similarity." Also at last year's Bufora conference were the first two Russian scientists to lecture on UFOs present and both speaking. They were Drs. Yuli Platov and Dr. Sergei Chernow. Dr. Platov studies the ionosphere, Dr. Chernow studies the Aurora Borealis, both of which are members of the Academy of Sciences in Moscow. I gave them a copy of the Santilli film at a later date, asked them to show them this to their colleagues in Russia, which they did, at the Academy of Sciences. I have a quote from, and I'll try and pronounce the name correctly, Professor Anatoly Smolozhnikov. I think that's correct. Coming from Yorkshire, I have problems with English, never mind Russian. He was the Surgeon General of the Soviet Army, now Russian Army, from 1989 to 1994. And I quote, "The body on the slab doesn't differ considerably from a human creature in appearance, in height and size. However, it has such deviations as a relatively big head and 6 digits on each of its hands and feet. The only other unusual detail of the autopsy which attracts my attention is the investigation of the creature's eyes." At the same screening was a Dr. Sergei Moroz, surgeon pathologist, Russian Academy of Sciences from 1976 to 1993. He now works at the Murmansk Psychiatric Clinic. And I quote, "All aspects and details of the Santilli film point out that the autopsy was real and it has been conducted by professionals, in my opinion. The lady in the film has no human origin in reality. That's the creature on the slab. Again, I mentioned colleagues from Norway. I will quote two Norwegian pathologists from Oslo. Dr. Carsten Nygren, who has conducted over 3,500 autopsies, and Dr. John Marius Jung, with many years' experience in the same pathological department as Dr. Nygren. Both physicians commented on various parts of the Santilli film, and Dr. Nygren stated when seeing their brain removed, and I quote, "This is not a human brain. It is completely polished and much too dark." Both physicians agreed that they did not believe the film was a hoax, i.e. a dummy, but would of course not draw any conclusions about the being on the table. Many of you attended the presentation yesterday of Daryl Sims, and one of the surgeons that Daryl has worked extensively with, in fact the main surgeon who oversees much of the surgery that they take, is Dr. Roger K. Lear from California. I met Dr. Lear earlier this year whilst visiting the United States, and he had seen the film and had the opportunity to see it again. I showed it to him in the United States. And from a long interview, this is briefly what Dr. Lear had to say, and I quote, "The handling of the alleged body by the individual, in my opinion, is not an autopsy surgeon, but most likely perhaps a general surgeon or someone in a medical speciality. I would like to mention the handling of the tissue seems to be real, and by what I mean is that the way that the tissue pressures both from the instrumentation cutting through the tissue likes what you see in a cutting through normal tissue and not through pieces of rubber, silicone or other artificial materials. The other things in the film, for example, if you run it in slow motion at a frame at a time, in the beginning, when he's looking at the body in general and flexing the knee, you can see that the thigh externally rotates, and he would have to be a pretty smart director to have the services of a physiologist and God knows what other expertise to build a dummy so that the external rotation of the thigh during flexing of the knee." And that's Dr. Roger K. Lear from Thousand Oaks, California. He mentions the fact that he didn't think it was a pathologist that was conducting the autopsy, and that has been echoed elsewhere. If Santilli's cameraman is to be believed, the people you see on the screen doing this are a Dr. Detlev Bronk, mentioned in the MJ12 papers, of course, highly controversial piece of paper in their own right, and a Dr. Williams. We did find a Dr. Williams who was around in 1947. Whether it's the same Dr. Williams or not, I don't know. But interestingly enough, neither of these two were actually pathologists. They were indeed surgeons. And we have quotes from some of the people I've also mentioned about this particular aspect. Again, Dr. Christopher Milroy, the University of Sheffield, and I quote, "Whilst the examination had features of a medically conducted examination, aspects suggest it was not conducted by an experienced pathologist, but rather by a surgeon." Again, I quote Dr. Mihash, University of Bâle, Switzerland, quote, "I do not question the capability of the pathologist or surgeon who is working on the corpse." Quote, Professor Cyril Wecht, United States, "They are either pathologists or surgeons who have performed a number of autopsies before." Professor Pier Luigi Baima-Bologna, University of Turin, Italy, "Definitely surgeons, not pathologists, but well experienced." Professor Jean-Pierre, University of Paris, France, and I quote, "The persons who performed the autopsy were certainly of the medical profession, if not experienced pathologists." So there does seem to be a degree of authoritative comments that what we are looking at is a dissection on autopsy of something flesh and blood, and that the people who are conducting this are not pathologists but could well be surgeons. And those are just a few of the quotes from the medical community that we've managed to obtain. I mentioned Dr. Lear, the surgeon that Beryl works with, and one of the comments I don't have in writing is about this particular part of the film, and that's the removal of the brain. And he was a military surgeon for quite some time and has seen a number of similar situations where brains were removed, and he is convinced without hesitation that this is exactly how it happens. And I think one of the comments from the special effects community is that this is the most difficult aspect of the film as far as recreating is concerned, if indeed it is a hoax. But as far as Dr. Lear is concerned, that looks extremely genuine. It looks like a brain being removed exactly as he remembers it during his training. referring to Dr. Lear again, as Daryl may have informed you yesterday, his speciality now, his job, if you like, his profession is surgery on the feet. And he told me he'd probably seen more pairs of feet than anyone on earth. But the creature has 6 fingers and 6 toes, and people have the technical term for this is polydactylism. And according to Dr. Lear, the creature does not suffer from polydactylism. An extra finger or an extra toe is usually a stump or a clone of one of the other digits. And he viewed this film at some length, and that whatever this thing is not suffering from polydactylism. It is meant to have 6 fingers and 6 toes. He gave a number of technical reasons why this is that are beyond me. But it was just another interesting aspect of the whole scenario.
Please stop taking flash pictures. You won't get any income on your phone.
Just a little side issue. If we had a better copy of the film, a first generation copy, which I don't have, you can actually see the cameraman on the film. At least on 2 occasions, he is reflected in the glass partition at the back, and also in the saw at some point when they're sawing the head. And he is wearing the white coveralls, whatever you would like to call them, and he's holding the camera up so. This is not a good enough copy to be able to view that. It's probably the first incident of its time to be debated on the internet. And I know there's a book coming out next year by a chap in the United States called Cal Korff, who has a book out at the moment, demolishing the Billy Meyer photographs. He made a number of comments about this film. He claims that it is a film set, that you're actually seeing only 3 walls, and that behind the cameraman here is open. Again, you have to have a good copy of the film to view this, but I'm afraid he is wrong. You can actually see all 4 walls. Again, it doesn't prove it's a fake, it just proves what he's had to say is incorrect. You have to view the film extremely carefully. Bob Scheller has confirmed this. An American researcher called Teresa Carlson has also confirmed this. And there's the brain. Okay, we'll end that there, please. It's just finished anyway. The next film I'm going to show just a few minutes of, just to illustrate exactly what we're talking about. If you remember the slides I showed you of the 2 gentlemen from Spiegel TV that turned up at Michael Hessman's conference in Dusseldorf, I have a copy of the film that they brought along. We were given a rough estimate of how much it cost to make this, which was £40,000. I don't know if that's strictly true, but they certainly spent a lot of time and a lot of money, a lot of effort trying to reproduce this. And I'll point out a few things as we go along the way. It's about a 3rd generation copy that I have, but I think it was made in strictly with Blue Peter fashion, and you'll see for why in just a moment. Here we go. Similar outfits. There is a telephone on the wall behind them here. Here's the creature. It does have 6 fingers and 6 toes. Damaged here. If you look at the tray of instruments here, that you'll find them in everybody's kitchen. Certainly not a scalpel. They tried to pass this off as the genuine article. We'll just show it for a few minutes up until they start and cut the creature open. I'll point out a few things along the way. The first thing they do, of course, we'll see in a moment, is get a hose pipe out and hose it down. There you go. I think the word of warning here is not to die in Germany if this is what they do to you. And certainly weren't allowed to do that in Yorkshire up until recently because there was a hose pipe ban anyway. Remember in the Santilli film they took a specimen sample from the damaged leg. See here they take a sample here. It looks like an Allen key. I don't know what it is. You see the arm, it almost falls off when they wobble it about. You can see the arms almost falling off. I thought they made it of paper mache and squeezy bottles and cornflake packets, and John Noakes was going to jump out at some point, but now begin to cut the thing open. Pay great attention to the knife, the way it cuts, how it cuts. It's not a scalpel. It's certainly not sharp. I think I've seen sharper spoons. Here you go. I would not like that gentleman to remove my appendix, I can assure you. They have to go over it again, look. Have another go. Still having difficulty trying to cut it. See it here. Pay great attention when he starts to get to this area, and because shortly after that we'll stop. You'll actually see the skin rip, pop open rather than it be cut. You'll get there in a moment. It's in this area here. It'll go pop. There you go, pop. There it goes. But we'll end up there and we'll show the last piece of film from it. This goes on for about 20 minutes. But interestingly enough, it finishes when they come to the head section. They cut this thing open, remove all kinds of offal and all kinds of things. They're just about to begin sawing the head, and that's where the film finishes. Again, a number of the special effects industry have said that's a very difficult procedure to reproduce. And quite an expensive one. Art skeptic Philip Klass, whom I met for the first time this year in the US, wrote to me and said that they'd heard of another attempt to recreate the film in Argentina from an Argentinian film. And I asked for a reference as to where we could find it, but it came somewhat in a circular route via a colleague on the internet, and has sent me this copy. It just arrived a few days before I came here. I thank Robin Lindsay for transferring this for me. It is extremely poor quality, and again we'll just show a few minutes of it, but it's a much better attempt to recreate the creature than the Germans did. Here we go. I hope. Can we turn the sound off, please? Yeah. The sound is... will they speak Spanish in Argentina? It makes no difference anyway, it's just to have the music. But it's a much better attempt to recreate the thing. Later on in this short piece of film, again, it's got 6 fingers. It does show how they recreated it, showed you building the model, etc. I just thought you'd like to see it nonetheless. A much better attempt than the people in Germany. You can see they've done a much better job in trying to study the Santilli film and to recreate the way that things happened. In the Santilli film, this is the thing here that Roger Lear talked about, where they flex the knee joints, and you can see the muscles of the leg actually rotate. I've been told to hurry up, so I think we'll end it there. But it just gives you a bit of an example of what can be done. Call it a day there. In conclusion, for certainly 2 years, probably longer, I told Santilli in no uncertain terms I didn't believe any of what he was saying. There are certain things he has said that I still don't believe. I think we must separate Santilli and the film. I think they are both completely different. I am hopeful that we will eventually be able to get to the bottom of the film. My opinions have been swayed not by Santilli or by any particular UFO researcher, but primarily by the opinions of a large proportion of the medical community. I would be wrong to say that all surgeons and all pathologists support this, but certainly a lot of those that we have shown it to do support this. I have a number of comments from other surgeons, pathologists from different parts of the world who agree that it is flesh and blood we are looking at, and not a special effects dummy. Whether we can ever prove that's a different matter. And to that extent, I reluctantly agreed to co-author a book that deals with part of this, not entirely this. This covers a small section of the book. And we are hopeful that the appeal that we've made in the book for others to come forward, fake or genuine, there are others out there, others, not just Ray Santilli, but somebody somewhere knows more about this film. I am ever hopeful and ever optimistic that they will come forward, and that sooner or later, probably later, we will eventually get to the bottom of it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
If you'd like to stay a moment, see, we'll probably take a couple of questions off a few people.
I see him. Yeah, sorry, Andy. Well, my colleague Andy Roberts has asked me to do something. I'm sorry, Andy, I did forget. He wanted to know how many people actually think the film is real and how many think it's fake. Is there anybody apart from me in the film that does think it's real? We got a couple. Yeah, not bad. About 10. But I spoke at the Young Convention earlier in the year, and we got 4. So that's a 150% increase on the 4. Do we have to take a show of how many say no, Andy?
Sorry?
We don't have to take a show of hands to say no. Any questions? Gentleman here.
Okay, you mentioned Colin Andrews earlier on. I read an article in the magazine, I think it was UFO Reality, in which Colin Andrews said that he'd spoken to the director of the Hakkuri City Space Museum. Is that correct? No?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
He was told by the director of this museum, good God, that
I can hear you.
he'd shown this film previously at CIA headquarters in Langley. Have you heard anything about that?
Yes, I mean there are a number of individuals, including Professor somebody or other, I can't mention the Japanese name, who claim that they have either seen this film or some of the wreckage prior to the release of the Santilli film. The only problem you have with that, of course, is that they've only come forward after the event, and trying to verify that is extremely difficult. There's a number of military sources claim to have seen the film prior to this. For those who are familiar with MJ12, Stanton Friedman and all that fiasco, one of their so-called agents is Agent Doty, and he claims to have also seen the film back in, I don't know when, 70s or 80s. That's just an aside issue. So there are a number of people who claim to either have seen the film prior to its release on television or have seen some of the artifacts in the film. And that's just one of them, Professor, Doctor or somebody other from Japan. I can't remember his name.
Is there no further development on that?
No. Have we have another question? Dave?
Well, a statement against its authenticity is that there was no impression of any attempt by the American Secret Service to block the showing of the film. But my workmates were telling me that there had been announced over the radio that American CIA agents were heading over fast to Britain to tell the British authorities to do something about it. And I checked with our local Radio 4th, and the journalist, the news person responsible, said he definitely remembered the story being broadcast about CIA agents coming across to stop the film or do something about it or ridicule it. What do you have to say about that?
What can I say? I'm not in the CIA, Dave, but to the best of my knowledge, there was no attempts by anyone to prevent the film being screened. I think the only person who had a bit of an attempt, which was a joke, was George Wingfield, because when it was shown in Sheffield, Ray Santilli's colleague put the film down and George pinched it, and they were running around like headless chickens trying to find it until George popped up with a big grin on his face and saying, "Here it is." But I have no knowledge of that ever happening. I'm told regularly that my phone's tapped. I don't believe a word of it.
Well,
you know.
Well, I did phone Radio 4th, our local Radio 4th, and they did say they did broadcast a story about CIA agents coming across to attempt to do something about it all.
I have no knowledge of that. I think we've time for one last question. One last question? Okay.
Hello.
I can hear you.
I'm not sure actually. If something gets dead like that and you cut into it, would it actually sort of issue?
Would it bleed?
Fluid?
Yes, the lady asks if it was dead, would it bleed when you cut it open? The answer to that is yes. There are various stages which a dead body can go through where you can cut it and it can bleed. Depends how long it's been dead, the way the body's been stored, etc. There are also other conditions, of course, when you cut a dead body and it will not bleed. But there are some indications that yes, dead bodies can bleed when you cut them open.
Okay, what colour was the blood if the brain was in it?
I don't know. I've just contacted, just in the last few weeks, a gentleman who has an awful lot of computer equipment in the UK, and one of the programs he has is to be able to change black and white film into colour. If we know of something in that film, if we know exactly what colour it is, he can use some kind of program to make that a colour, pretty much like they did with some of the old silent films. You now see bits of them restored into colour. And I've asked him, and he should be getting back to me next week for a quote as to how much that will cost. And if it's not too expensive, we will try and go down that route, perhaps put one of the stills forward and see what happens. Probably nothing, but it's certainly worth a try, and it's an interesting attempt, if you like. Thank you very much. Thank you.